ladies and gentlemen, to Duval's centennial celebration. You know, on the eve of our city's 100th anniversary, Duval can take great pride in its people and in its accomplishments. And as we celebrate this milestone, it's important to pause and reflect on the past and embrace the bright future. Today, we will all learn more about our city's storied history, its founding fathers, and the leaders and the citizens who over the years and through their commitment and sacrifices helped lead us to this proud moment. And as the great thinker Plato once said about his hometown of Athens, this city is what it is because our citizens are what they are.
It's hard to imagine a time when there was no town of Duval, but that is where our story begins. The Snoqualmie Valley and the river that runs through it, they've always been here, silent partners through the centuries. It was only a matter of time before they would eventually become discovered and form the setting and backdrop for people seeking a new life, a new place to call home. Human habitation of the region goes back thousands of years, as members of what would become the Snoqualmie Indian tribe lived and roamed the length of the valley, preferring the Duval region for hunting and fishing. The first wave of white settlers came to the Snoqualmie Valley in the 1850s and 60s. People arrived here from around the globe, including a large number from the Scandinavian countries and the United Kingdom. Family names like Bjorklund, Stackhouse, Shanahan, Morst, Radcliffe, and Pearson became well known in the valley. The later 1860s saw a new group of American settlers come to this region, Civil War veterans. Back in those days, the valley was a maze of alders, vine maples, wild crabapple, and thick underbrush. Travel was largely via Indian trails or the river. Some settlers paddled canoes, copying the Native American mode of transportation. The Snoqualmie people proved to be a great neighbor to many of the new settlers arriving here. During the 1870s, homesteading families continued to move into the valley, lured by the prospect of good farming land. It was an isolated existence for those early residents. Charles Harper Stackpole and his wife arrived by canoe in 1870. At that time, the next closest white woman was in the town of Snohomish. In 1871, Francis Duvall arrived as a homesteader, and his brother James appeared 4 years later, purchasing 583 acres for $600. The Snoqualmie River provided the best means of traveling up and down the valley in those early years. During times of heavy logging, some folks would even walk across the log jams to get from one side of the river to the other. Eventually, enterprising settlers, including the Duval brothers, developed a simple ferry service to get across the river. In 1875, steamboats arrived on the Snoqualmie River, making it much easier for settlers to travel through the valley. Averaging 70 feet in length, the riverboats carried passengers, mail, groceries, and everything else from table salt to logging locomotives. Nearly every farmer had a dock where the riverboats could tie up. Riverboat names like the Black Diamond, Alki, Nellie, Echo, Lucerne, Black Prince, and the Skagit became familiar to people living up and down the valley. With farming and logging forming the backbone of the local economy, a community of homesteaders started to form on the banks of the Snoqualmie River. All the little town needed now was a name.
They had enough people in here now to start a post office, so a man named Lucius Day, he looked out of his window and saw two blooming cherry trees out in his yard and Cherry Valley, so that's how the name came about.
The first actual public building in town was the schoolhouse, built by community members in 1875 on an acre of land donated by William McDonald. That first year saw an enrollment of 5 students and 1 teacher. Teachers were paid $50 a month, and some boarded in local homes for $10 a month. By 1885, 14 students were attending the local school. By 1890, logging was becoming a major economic force here. Crashing timber, logs on the move, and buzzing mill saws became familiar sights and sounds for the residents here. All that lumber was a good thing in a growing community where everything from buildings to sidewalks were made of wood. Francis and James Duval logged their property, utilizing skid roads, which were pathways lined with cedar posts laid crossways. Cut logs on their way to the river would be dragged by horse or James's oxen across these skid roads. Getting the cut timber from forest to sawmill was a constant challenge for the loggers. Teams of horses and oxen were used, along with donkey engines, which were steam-powered winches using a cable to drag the logs along. Millett and McKay built the area's first logging railroad into the valley. This eventually became the Cherry Valley Logging Company, and later, a branch of Weyerhaeuser Timber Company. Logging camps sprung up at Cherry Valley along Cherry Creek, on Ring Hills just west of town, and Stillwater a few miles south. Logging was tough, thirsty work, and to help quench that thirst, Bob Crossman built the Valley House in 1892 on the northern edge of town. In 1893, the second school building was constructed. With double the rooms of the first schoolhouse and a 1-acre schoolyard, the new school was built at a cost of $714.50. 1893 also saw the arrival of one of the more well-known pioneering families, the Dohertys. John and Kate Doherty and their 6 children arrived on the river steamer Echo and moved into a house that became much more than just a home for the Doherty family. Another family that would make their mark on the history of Duval was the Hicks family. Arthur and Pauline Hicks moved here from the Midwest and established the first general store in town in 1905. The move was not initially embraced by everyone in the Hicks family.
My mother wanted to go back to Indiana. She said, I just came out to see my uncle, but I want to go home. So when my dad came back, he said, Pauline, I have to tell you, you can walk around there for 2 days and not see anybody. But he says it's a beautiful country and it's by the river.
Getting supplies for the store presented great challenges for Arthur Hicks.
If he wanted to order supplies for a store, he would have to start out early in the morning, probably at daylight, and hike across the valley over to Kirkland, where he would then catch a ferry over to Seattle, go up to Cooper and Levi, was a big outfitters in Seattle, and he'd order his supplies for the store, and then hike back to Cherry Valley, and then the supplies would come up on a riverboat, maybe a few days later or a week later.
Crossing the river became much easier in 1905 when King County decided to build a bridge across the Snoqualmie. Their solution? The Cherry Valley Swing Bridge. 192 feet long and perfectly balanced across a cement pier, the bridge could be swiveled until it was parallel with the river, allowing boats to pass through unobstructed. Swinging the bridge open was a manual operation, and local residents were recruited to help operate the bridge. The transformation of Cherry Valley into the town of Duval was the direct result of plans to build a railway line into the lower Snoqualmie River Valley. Beginning in 1909, not one but 2 railroad companies started plans to lay track here.
2 were inseparable. The town actually is here because of the railroad. There was no town until the railroad came through here.
With the arrival of the Milwaukee and the Great Northern Railroads, land was suddenly in demand. James Duval's homestead on the southern edge of Cherry Valley came up for sale in 40-acre lots. Local businessman Jack Bird snapped up 3 of these land parcels and formed the Cherry Valley Townsite Company, taking on E. Milton Steffens as a partner. The community of Cherry Valley lay right in the path of the incoming railway lines, so it was decided to relocate a number of buildings away from the intended train tracks and closer to the new construction going on to the south. This included the Hicks Store, the Methodist Church, the Doherty House, and the Grange Hall. With all the new growth south of Cherry Valley, the question arose concerning the town's name. Leave it as Cherry Valley, or pick a new one? And the winning name? To honor Samuel G. Cosgrove, 6th governor of the state of Washington, the name didn't last for long.
And then the town got a notice from the post office that they could not use the name Cosgrove because that name had already been given to another town down south of Tacoma.
The name Duval was settled on to honor pioneer homesteader, logger, and farmer James Duvall. In 1910, the Chicago, Milwaukee, and Puget Sound Railroad began construction of their branch line from Cedar Falls down the Snoqualmie Valley all the way to Everett. With 2 railroads coming through Duval, there was no shortage of excitement about this new town, and business lots went fast.
And they published full-page advertisements in local newspapers about the coming metropolis of Duval, and they would bring wagon loads of people out here on weekends from Seattle to look this town over, And they were advertising for what kind of businesses they needed here in this town, and a lot of them started coming.
The 3rd school, built back in 1907, couldn't keep up with the growing population of children in the region. So in the fall of 1910, the 2-story Cherry Valley Elementary School was built to contain 8 grades of students, a lunchroom, and indoor lavatories. Those early schoolyards and classrooms were filled with an interesting mixture of local kids and children of families recently arrived from foreign lands. Modernized communication came to Duval in 1911 in the form of a town newspaper and telephone service. Of course, private phone conversations were a hit-and-miss proposition back then.
We had party lines at that time, and there might be 6 or 8 people on the line. And if you put in a call and your neighbor picked up the receiver, they could listen to your call.
Fresh out of journalism school, Miss Mabel Duford started the Duval Citizen, a weekly newspaper published every Saturday. The paper featured world, national, state, and local news. Nothing quite like a turn-of-the-century small-town newspaper. The occasional ghastly incident or lurid scandal was sure to liven up a slow news week. The local timber industry continued to thrive at this time. There were several logging operations in the hills surrounding the town, employing hundreds of men. The wages were good also, up to $6 a day plus meals.
In fact, at one time, from what I understand, that Stillwater was the logging capital of the United States. And those logs were logs. They're not like the toothpick you see on the logging trucks today. Like, for example, logs that were taken off my farm were 20 feet in diameter, not circumference, but diameter.
The Cherry Valley Shingle Mill also supplied electricity for the town through a steam-operated dynamo they installed. The dynamo had a limited capacity, so the potential for blowing fuses at the mill was great without some careful monitoring of electrical use.
Local newspaper used to publish things like electric iron curling day has been changed from Tuesdays to Thursday for the next 2 weeks or whatever. And so you had to use certain appliances on the days that they said you could use them, so they'd be prepared down at the mill.
Rail lines were finally completed, and the Great Northern began running service in the spring of 1911. Early rail service to Monroe was basically a freight train with a couple of passenger cars added to the end. Travelers were often treated to multiple stops through the valley, depending on the freight being hauled.
Novelty, outside of town here where the roundabout is today, that was a little community Novelty. And from this station to Novelty, the fare was 10 cents. And maybe if you want to go to Stillwater, it was 15 cents, a little bit more further down, and 25 cents to Carnation. And so the rates were, the further you went, the more you paid.
The coming of the railroads had a dramatic impact on logging in the valley. Logging companies built spur tracks from the main lines out to the hills where the trees were being cut. The logs could then be loaded onto flat cars and quickly transported to the sawmills rather than being dragged by teams of horses or oxen. Log trains pulling up to 100 flat cars full of logs through the valley were a common sight in the boom years of logging. Regular passenger rail service didn't begin until April 21st, 1912. That celebrated bit of local news may have gone overlooked due to an event that received a bit of press attention that same week. Eventually, regular passenger rail service was established with up to 4 trains a day stopping in Duval.
You could get on the railroad here in Duval and go all the way to Chicago.
My aunt would come up from Everett on the Milwaukee or Great Northern. We had both of those trains that went through Duval. You can even, if you're coming from Monroe, you can see where the tracks were and how they kind of went side by side and then joined together.
The 2 rival train depots stood only 100 feet apart in downtown Duval. Only one remains today, the Milwaukee Depot. Of course, there were other ways to travel through the valley in those early years of the new century.
The road to Monroe was very crude. It was in the middle of a forest. It was just hacked out with trees on both sides of it. And again, very muddy and almost impassable during the winter months.
As the roads eventually improved, automobile traffic increased and gave locals another option for getting around. As early as 1911, auto stages began operating out of Duval. Daily service by automobile between the Valley House and Kirkland became available every day except Sunday. With more and more travelers arriving by automobile and rail, there was a need for additional overnight hotel space in Duval. This led to the building of the Forest Inn, which opened in 1912. This 3-story Bavarian-style inn cost a whopping $10,000 to build and became the architectural showpiece of the town. The Forest Inn featured 18 rooms, each with running water. The basement was used by the local Moose Lodge for their meetings and activities. By 1912, there were 27 businesses represented in town, including 4 hotels. Olive Duvall's popular cafe advertised meals served all hours, 25 cents and up. Olive also rented out a half-dozen rooms on the floor above her cafe to bachelors looking for a place to stay. Downtown Duval was a lively, if somewhat messy place to be. A special election in December of 1912 allowed citizens to vote to officially incorporate Duval. On January 6, 1913, the town of Duval became, well, the town of Duval. A officially. Duval's first city council meeting on January 7th was a lively affair. Newly elected Mayor Lon Brown hosted the meeting in the back room of his confectionery, which served as the town pool hall. First official business transaction? The issuing of a saloon license to Wallace and Speaker, owners of the Forest Inn. Most popular license issued that first year? Dog licenses. 45 were issued at $1 each. Duval's first mayor was Alonzo C. Brown. Originally from Pennsylvania, Lon had moved west to Granite Falls, where he mined for silver and gold before setting up shop in the new town of Duval. His confectionery sold everything from ice cream to musical instruments to candy bars. He started a lending library, which may have been the first used bookstore in the state. Brown's business slogan typified his confidence for all his ventures. A one-man chamber of commerce, Mayor Brown was a tireless promoter and civic booster for Duval. His desire to see Duval host its own fair resulted in the very first Snoqualmie Valley Fair that September. He even donated his new building on Main Street for agricultural exhibits during the fair. Amazingly, Washington State Governor Ernest Lister agreed to attend the fair and give a speech to the people of Duval. That first fair would be the springboard to Duval's long history of lively and popular community events. After the fair, Lon Brown converted his exhibition building into the first movie house in Duval. Opening night for the Duval Theater, Christmas 1913. Tilly's Punctured Romance was the featured movie. Great Northern made special train runs from Tolt to allow people to catch a film in Duval. Not all the news that first year was happy. Duval's first fire claimed the popular cafe on June 1st. In a town constructed of wood, the inherent danger of fire would go on to claim a number of Duval's most cherished buildings, including the original Valley House and the landmark Forest Inn. Duval continued to grow. Farming and logging were the mainstays of the economy. Dairy, fruit, vegetable, and crop farming were all thriving here. Prior to the railroads, milk from dairy farms would be transported by a milk boat. Now, with train service available, the milk was taken to Novelty, where railroad cars were used to transport it to the condensery in Monroe. One of the local leaders in the timber industry was the Cherry Valley Shingle Company, that employed over 40 men and produced thousands of shingles every day. Transportation continued to evolve in the region. The riverboats gave way to the trains, and the trains would one day give way to the automobiles and buses, which at this point were just starting to arrive on the scene. World War I ushered in a sobering chapter in Duval's early history, as young men throughout the valley enlisted for service. The war also impacted the local timber industry, as there was a heavy demand for spruce used in the framework of early warplanes. Soldiers were sent to logging camps to raise production levels of the Sitka spruce. Drama and danger were also found closer to home.
Now, in 1915, the town had a real Western adventure. They had their first official bank robbery. 4 men charged the bank, and the cashier filled a pillowcase with about $400 worth of silver coins.
I was a baby in a crib when that happened, so that was 97 years ago.
And they charged back out of the bank with guns blazing, crossed Main Street, ran down the alley between the hardware store and what is now the present Duval bookstore.
And they were spilling it down, it went down the road down towards the river.
One made a break for the river, and he had the money with him, so they followed him. They cornered him down to the riverbank, and they exchanged some more shots, and then he jumped in and tried to swim the river. By then it was dark, and they shot at him, and they don't know if they hit him or not. They couldn't see him in the water anymore, but they found the pillowcase on the bank with the money in it.
And some of it went in the river. They even found some of it later, not too long ago. Got as far as Snohomish. It floated down the river, yeah. That was from that bank robbery.
1915 will always be known for the winter of the big snow. Over 36 inches of snow fell at the end of 1915 and the beginning of 1916. Ice on local ponds and lakes froze to the depth of 6 inches. One of the eventual hallmarks of Duval, its diversity of residents, would never be as evident as it was during these years when the town population numbered less than 300. It was a cheerfully mismatched collection of farmers, loggers, rail workers, river boatsmen, and shopkeepers. And somehow, it all worked. As Duval moved into the 1920s and 30s, the town would face many changes and challenges. 1921 saw a flood that some considered the worst in Duval's history. Segments of the local economy began to slow down, especially in the timber industry. As more and more of the lumber resources were logged off, the large lumber camps began to close and move elsewhere. Improvements and advancements in automobiles would cause cutbacks in rail service, and the riverboats had all but disappeared from the scene. Last riverboat to come into Duval, the stern-wheeler Black Prince in 1928. Times may have been economically challenging, but the ebb and flow of small-town life still went on for the residents of Duval. The town has always rallied around its high school sports teams. Duval went basketball crazy in the 1920s as the men's high school team won the championship in 1921. This was actually the second championship team for Duval, as 4 years earlier the girls' team took top spot in the King County Championship. Not sure if these championships were partly won in spite of or because of their home court, which was definitely not regulation in size or design. In 1922, the girls' team won county and came within 1 point from winning the state championship. Music and dancing has always had a long and lively history in Duval and has always played an important role in the social life of the town. The second floor of Mannion's hardware store acted as a dance floor.
They would hold dances up there, and I remember Ralph Taylor telling me that the whole building would shake when they were dancing up there. And he would try to stay away from certain areas up there because he knew down below in the hardware store there was an area where they sold pitchforks and scythes and axes and things, and those were all sitting in display things. And he was afraid that if he was over one of them and that floor caved in, he'd be impaled on farm tools and stuff.
When it came to entertainment here in Duval, we had to be resourceful, really, because we were used to that. That's the way we had grown up and lived. We would have regular picnics and hot dog roasts and so forth. And in the summertime, I remember a couple of gals with so much ambition brought down these kettles of corn all cooked.
Not all pursuit of fun back then would fall under the category of good idea.
Anyway, we were in Stan Chapman's basement, and there was a case of dynamite there. So, golly, we should try this out, see if it's any good or not. So we took 10 sticks and we wrapped them together. And we went up to the old Duval Bridge, which was all wooden at that time. And we put the 10 sticks of dynamite halfway between the bridge and the river, and the fuse just short enough so it wouldn't drop in the water. And of course, the explosion went off. And the marshal of the town of Duval, where the parking lot is down below the present day bridge, was where his house was. Well, naturally, he woke him up with that dynamite. So he came running up the road, still putting his pants on, saw us, and he said, "Damn it, I know who did that." But so we got by with it, and we didn't do any damage. That was the good thing.
The national prohibition against alcohol was in effect during these days, and in some circles it was gladly embraced. For others, not so much. The economy may have been down, but school participation was up, partly due to the closure of Novelties High School, which brought all their students to join Duvall's classes. Even with a climbing enrollment, you wouldn't exactly say the school was bursting at the seams.
We had our own high school here, and I graduated from the high school here in 1934. And I think we had a class of 13 that year.
Just getting to school was a challenge for many of the children. As a result, consistent attendance was noted and celebrated in the local newspaper. To add to their school challenges, farm chores were never far away.
It was my duty to get those eggs cartoned up, and first of all I had to candle them and carton them and get them ready. So after schools, why, that was my chore for the night.
I'd get up at 3 o'clock in the morning, rain, go down by horseback down to round up the cows for milking, and then we'd have breakfast with Big Jim because he's a wonderful cook. But we worked hard and we played hard. I tell people, you know, our parents didn't realize that Abraham Lincoln freed the slaves in 1863 because they worked us real hard. I mean, a day off was still 8 hours work.
Some chores were more enjoyable than others. Velma Hicks Hill remembers working in her father's store as a young girl.
My dad would let me help him put things in the shelves. And so I said, would you like me to put the candy in the candy case and the dishes? Because instead of boxes of chocolates, he's got those little dishes that we had. They look like Chinaware. You know the rest, don't you? I would help myself a little bit once in a while.
There were side benefits to landing a job on the farm, namely the food.
Oh my gosh, I mean, there'd be steaks, roast, and pork, and chicken, and corn on the cob, and ice cream, and a lot of that ice cream was homemade. And if you walked out of that kitchen weighing less than 300 pounds, it was your own fault, because you knew you were going to work 200 of that off in that afternoon.
By the time the Great Depression struck, Duval had economically come full circle and was once again relying mainly on the farming community for a livelihood. 60 families were involved in dairy farming at this time. The Snoqualmie Valley was not immune to the Great Economic Depression that began in 1929 and lasted for the better part of a decade. The Milwaukee Railroad discontinued passenger traffic, although they did offer bus service through the valley. It wasn't all doom and gloom. There was also progress and positive changes during this time. 1932 was also the year that Duval not only had an all-female city council, it elected its first female mayor, Mabel Bork.
We promoted women both in business careers and in politics, and I thought, this is my kind of town. Look at all the women here running things.
Duval's public library also emerged during the 1930s, in large part due to the efforts of the Duval Civic Club. Their initial fundraising effort netted $25, and club members journeyed to Seattle, coming back with a haul of 70 used books on a variety of subjects. The 1940s were a turbulent time for the world. In Duval, blackouts were ordered, and all buildings were to be sealed up so that no light would show at night in case of enemy air attack. Barns were a problem because they had a lot of windows, doors, and cracks where light could escape. One of Duval's more unique contributions to the war effort was a small 12-by-12 building erected on 3rd and Stewart Street. Duval's hut was part of the Army Air Force Civil Defense Program, keeping a watchful eye for German and Japanese aircraft. As the war years gave way to more peaceful times, Duval in the 1940s and 50s moseyed along during what many have called the quiet years. The post office was moved to the Hicks Market, where Velma Hicks served as postmaster for the next 36 years. One of the best parts of going into Hicks's was going to the post office and visiting with Velma. She was just wonderful, and if you were just at least a decent human being, she was always nice to you. And, that's what you want in life, is to be around people that you can talk to about your kids or your family or whatever. Other changes included the Valley School discontinuing its high school program. This led to decades of local kids jumping on a bus and heading down the road to Tolk.
We loved our bus driver, Mr. Lundquist. I have gotten in trouble once on the bus. I put gum on the bus driver's seat, and he was really mad, and he found out it was me, and he was really disappointed in me because I would never do anything like that. And I'm really sorry I ever did that, Mr. Lundquist.
Church building and attendance was strong in those days, as Duval now had a few different churches to choose from. Quite the difference from the days when virtually the entire town would turn out on Sunday mornings to attend services at the Methodist Church. 1951 saw the construction of Duval's third bridge over the Snoqualmie River. This new structure was a welcome addition to the town.
The town at that time, the town limits extended from the bridge there at Virginia Street up to Stevens Street. And that was the extent of the city limits of the town. You could stand on Main Street and look down the street and see who was in town just by counting the cars parked on the side of the road.
Duval boasted a homegrown celebrity during these years. Actress and singer Martha Wright, whose father was a local judge, made it all the way to Broadway, where she gained a major success as Mary Martin's replacement in South Pacific. She never forgot her roots, as evidenced by this radio broadcast.
My favorite stage role, as you might guess, was Nellie Forbush in South Pacific. My favorite real-life role, Martha Wright of Duval, Washington.
A slow news day was common during these quiet years. But things were about to get very interesting in Duval. The 1960s and 70s were here. Duval's trademark melting pot of residents added a new ingredient in the 1960s and 70s, the long hairs. On the surface, it might have seemed an odd fit. This small farming, logging community, and members of that generation's counterculture. And yet, somehow, the relationship flourished.
When I first came to Duval, there really wasn't a hell of a lot going on here. But it had interesting people living in it, and the people were courteous and nice.
There's a time when the counterculture people were looking for elbow room, freedom, and Duval offered that. And a good number of those people live here to this day, and they're important to the people of Duval.
Dairy farmers that lived down below on the river road occasionally would herd their cows through town. So all of a sudden, it'd just be taken over with a whole herd of Holsteins coming through, which was quite amazing.
Their reasons for coming to the valley were as diverse as their backgrounds. I came here on a freight train in '69 and met Larry Vanover and Gary Eagle, and they lived out here in Duval, and the plan was let's all move to Duval and have our own little business out here in the country so we could ride horses to work.
Always had this fascination of making a little house of my own in a forest. I immediately built what has been referred to as a wooden tent.
And it was a slow life, and things were very peaceful and happy, and nothing was too crowded, and it was just great.
I think that when people talk about the hippie period of Duval, there's some things that they probably might not understand. And the main thing is that the people that they're talking about weren't really hippies. They might have called us hippies behind our backs because in those days, if you had long hair, and you could have been a doctor, and they would have called you a hippie.
Back then, there were some suspicious eyes being cast on the long hairs that were out here in the valley. And but once the people out here realized that we came out and wanted to live here and work here, then the doors started to open.
The town's secret weapon for bringing all of its various people and personalities together in happy harmony, the silver spoon.
It started out as probably the smallest building on Main Street in Duval. coincidentally and comically, next door to a barber shop. So you have this little hippie restaurant next door to a barber shop. Now, can you imagine the barber sitting there on a slow day, watching all that long hair go in the door? Those doors were about that far apart. The Silver Spoon was well known for its food. Everybody loved it.
The brownies were what were so good, you know, that was the #1 draw, I think, with just these rich chocolate brownies, just to die for.
The cinnamon rolls were big, but they weighed less than an ounce. They were so light, and we would brush them with honey butter instead of frosting, so that was. We did tofu burritos, and we did biscuits and gravy. We did vegetarian lasagna, but we did prime rib. So that started something. That started the locals, the rednecks and the hippies coming together at the table because they all wanted that food. And there was something there for everyone.
And of course, the people who worked at the Spoon were beautiful women. And it was visually stimulating enough to draw every old codger in the valley into that place. And so in the mornings for coffee, there'd be a lot of elderly gentlemen in there with big smiles, you know.
It became a destination restaurant for people from out of town, and they found the local color very interesting, I'm sure.
Duval has always had a lively music scene, and this era was no different. Well, the most popular location for music in Duval was, in its heyday, was the Silver Spoon, when it had an upper floor and they had a stage and they had everything. And the Riley and Maloney were out here, and Dave Van Ronk, and you know, just Odetta. I mean, Lord, they had a lot of great acts out here. When Odetta sang here, it was one night, the lights went out and there was lightning, and she kept singing in the dark. It was just so neat, you know.
I remember after I would bake, going home, and I would be in my car in the parking lot on a summer night, and they would have all the windows open in the Grange Hall upstairs, and I could hear some sing-along, which to many of us is kind of like, oh my God, a sing-along. But it was really great, really special to hear everybody singing together.
In the summer of 1968, the Sky River Rock Festival and Lighter Than Airfare was held nearby. America's first ever multi-day outdoor rock concert, featuring national acts such as Santana, Jesse Colin Young, and the Grateful Dead. There was still very much a small-town feel to Duval.
Police Department was actually created in 1984. I was hired the latter part of 1985. We didn't have much to start with. The old original City Hall, before it was remodeled for the third time, had an old stairwell that went up the back side with a little 8x8 office. We had a metal desk with a rotary dial telephone. I think there was one chair, and that was pretty much it, a scratch pad of paper and a couple pencils. So there were a lot of young kids that were obviously raised in the valley, and as one can imagine, we didn't have internet back in those early days or cable TV, so just like the adults who would find things to do on a Friday or Saturday evening by going to the lounge or the tavern, for example, the young kids felt like, well, that's the wide open gate to go out and have fun in the valley. So they did all sorts of cantankerous things. They had drag races between the two cities, see who could get there first and fast, and they had their own little competition that they do, and of course that kept us busy chasing them down.
As Duval moved into the 1980s and 90s, it experienced a startling growth spurt that coincided with a new group of settlers to the area, the commuters. In just 1 year, 1986, Duval's population jumped by an astounding 25%. The worldwide success of a little software company based in Redmond certainly played a factor in all this growth.
I moved to Duval in 1989, and the only reason I moved out here was there's one place I could afford to buy a house. So my girlfriend at the time and I were looking for a place to live, and it was a choice between living in Kent or living out here. And the day we came out here, they were spraying the fields with their horse manure, and it was reeking really bad. I mean, the odor was just horrendous. And we looked at this house, and it was a nice place, and she didn't really want to live out here. This was too far out for her. She worked at the time for Microsoft in Redmond. And so as we walked away, the real estate agent said, "What do you want to do?" And I said, "Well, I'll sign the papers. I'll just tell her in 3 days."
The entrepreneurial spirit was alive and well during these times as old businesses were revitalized and new ventures started. One of the historic anchors of downtown is the Duval bookstore, owned and operated by Mike and Vicki Ullage for 37 years.
Being here for as many years as we have, we've actually been able to learn pretty near everybody's name. And these people become friends. You learn about their history, you follow their families. They know about your family, they ask about your kids, and that's what you can get from a small town like Duval.
When contemplating his eventual retirement from the bookstore, Mike has one question.
What are we going to do with all this junk when the day comes? That has been a question in the back of my mind for a long time. I can only hope that I die first.
Not fair.
Another business that has stood the test of time is everyone's favorite local Mexican restaurant, Ixtapa.
The first time I remember I came to Duval, it was Duval Days. That's the first thing, and I really like it. We live in Bellevue and we wanted to move to a small town.
We start right here where I've been sitting. I used to be the pharmacy, Duval drugstore.
One of the yearly highlights of the Duval Days Parade is Ixtapa's colorful and musical participation with singing, dancing, and of course the horses.
So I started inviting people from friends I know, they have horses, and we do Duval Days with the Ixtapa restaurant and walking horses and a mariachi band.
And the secret of Ixtapa's success?
Good salsa and warm chips. So as soon as you come in and taste my salsa and my warm chips and you like it, everything is good.
The high school returning to Duval was a banner event for the town as Cedar Crest opened its doors for the first time in 1993. One of the ongoing challenges for farmers and other valley residents is the tendency of the Snoqualmie River to rise over its banks and flood the valley. Local farmers had to learn to be creative and flexible in these changing times.
Well, we don't want to make hay anymore, and now if we can't sell our beef anymore, we thought, what are we going to do? And Ray said, maybe we'll grow pumpkins.
I guess
now it seems to be the pumpkin craze.
If you have a pile of lemons, I guess you better make lemonade.
As Duval greeted the new millennium, one of the more amazing examples of community involvement was the restoration and establishment of the Doherty House as a King County landmark in 2002. This historic house stands as a living link to Duval's early history, thanks to the tireless efforts of so many volunteers with the Duval Historical Society. keeping alive the spirit of the town's time-honored traditions while at the same time embracing new change and new people. That's always been a Duval trademark and continues to this day.
This is the 53rd year they've done the pancake breakfast, and every year the thing just keeps going. Every year you wonder, is this year nobody shows up, and the thing just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger.
Originally, it was created as a fundraiser for tools and equipment that taxes just couldn't yield.
And people stand in line for an hour and a half out here in the rain to come in. Again, it's not about the breakfast, it's the community thing. So it's pretty amazing. And then they come through the line, they have their breakfast, they go outside. There's activities for the kids out there. It's got to be at least 10 years ago or so. We built a little wooden house with the cutouts where the kids go out with the garden hose and they get to spray water on the plywood cutout. Who'd have thought? I mean, it's like the biggest attraction in the whole thing for the kids, and they just line up out there. So our guys really like the interaction with the kids especially, so it's a good deal.
– 2013 finally arrived, and it's been a year of centennial celebrations and memories as the town looked back over the amazing 100-year ride of its history.
So something unique for this year that the city was able to do was the Centennial Project down at the end of Stevens Street on the way into McCormick and Depot Parks. Obviously really well traveled. Something that was really fun, again, is it's reflective of our community. I mean, you see it was purposely done in design and through a visioning process with a bunch of citizens, Centennial Committee members, and you know, really just a good community-based project where we looked at from the bottom level how we wanted to design that project, what we wanted it to look like, and how we wanted to incorporate centennial celebrations into it. So you see that in different sculptures that were selected by local artists and other artists as well. And then I think one of the things that we had the most fun with was the trellis piece, the big wood piece that's down there that is really reflective of the city's early history in logging and railroad. And so that was just a really fun piece to be a part of, where city staff worked on it and milled that wood by themselves and assembled the thing by themselves, and really were able to put our own touch on it. So something really fun.
The last time we had a festival like this was in 1968, and it was a real different environment back then, but we're excited. This is going to be a great family event. We've got a lot of activities planned throughout the day, a lot of great bands for everybody, and I think the biggest thing about this is it's all part of our 100th celebration of who we are in Duval.
Welcome to Duval.
The sun just came out. We're gonna rock this place.
It's wonderful that whoever started the Snow River Rock Festival here did that, because it's carrying on a tradition of much more than just getting together for music. There's an undercurrent of something really good here, and I applaud the people that put this on, and I'm honored to be here to fill the shoes of Alice Stewart. Just a great, great time here in Duval today.
We were listening to Crab Radio, and they were broadcasting a demolition derby in England. And they had taken a piano, and they had these big axes, and they were chopping up the piano. And Gary and I said, well, where's the noise? Where's the sound? We've got to have sound, you know?
We wanted to get all the sound, all the notes at once.
Yeah, all the notes at once. That's what we were after. So we thought, well, how can we do that? Could we take a piano and like push it out of the second story window or something? And then we got to thinking, well, maybe we could lift it up inside of a barn and drop it down.
Or a church.
Or
we
a
tried
church.
a couple churches.
Yeah, that's right. We tried a couple of churches. They wouldn't let us do it. So then we said, no, the way to do it is get a helicopter. So we rented a helicopter from a guy down at Old Boeing Field. And
Larry had some property in Duval. That's how we wanted
yeah,
up
that's
here.
right. We had I had 3 acres in Duval. We'll pick this thing up in a helicopter and drop it at my property. And we were doing this as a benefit for Crab Radio and the Helix newspaper. And I go down to the Boeing airport and get in a helicopter with this man. My wife takes me down, drops me off, and I take a hit of acid just before I get in the helicopter, because I wanted to make sure I was good and high when this happened. Mm-hmm. So then we start flying out here, and we're coming over Redmond Ridge, and we see a long line of cars all the way across the valley, and the helicopter guy said, he said, it must be an awful nice day. There's a lot of people out here. Little did I know, but they were all going to my house. So when we finally got here, the helicopter guy is very nervous now because there's thousands of people on the ground.
Our people are just pouring in.
Yeah, like it's like a huge anthill. It's wonderful. The helicopter guy flies over and sits down on top of the piano, and he said, I can't do this. I said, what do you mean you can't do this? You know, like I'm like freaking out, right? Because he's gonna screw up our entire day. So he said, well, all those people down there, you didn't tell me about all the people. And I said, don't worry about the people. He said, well, I can't just fly over them. And I said, when you fly over them, they're going to spread like the Red Sea. And he said, oh, yeah, sure. So we hook the piano into the bottom of him, and he takes off. And sure enough, as he lifts up and goes over the crowd, they just part like like the Red Sea.
Right.
Like the Red
Very
Sea.
good.
Thank
Very
you.
good, right.
And, but when he finally drops it, he completely misses this enormous wood pile that we wanted it to crash into. It landed right beside the wood pile. And by the time I'd gotten all the way down to where the piano was, there were a whole bunch of guys lifting it up and carrying pieces of it off.
And the piano, it just went smuck. It didn't make a noise.
Right,
It just made this big spluck.
It imploded. The piano drop seemed to be the predicator for Sky River Rock Festival, which is definitely the predicator for Woodstock.
Wow.
So we always figured we were the guys who kind of started Woodstock. Not being egomaniacs at all, you know.
Well, they were all real muddy, you know. I guess that had something to do with it.
So it's 7:45 on August 3rd, 2013. This piano is going to be hoisted up about 40, 50 feet, and it's going to come crashing on down, and it's going to be captured on film. Yeah, piano drop in Duval 2013. Yee-hoo! Art was such a big part of Duval, which is why I think I was attracted to it early on, because there was a lot of creative energy, a lot of creative people. There's artists all over the place, even though they're not as visible and not as active as other artists might be. They're still there, and there's musicians, and there's at this point several theater groups and a dance studio, photography. There's a lot of art happening in Duval.
I feel really lucky to be at Cedar Crest High School during this era. I think we have really, really good, caring students. I'm thinking about a couple of clubs in particular. We have a Random Acts of Kindness Club, which I am a part of that club. And one of the things that we do is we clean the streets of Duval.
This one day I picked up our local newspaper, and in there was an article about the Cedar Crest High School Random Act of Kindness Club, and I thought, that is so cool. I wish that there had been a Random Acts of Kindness Club when I was in high school, because I really could have used it. So 1 week out of the year, for this will be our 8th year, we all come together and we support local businesses, and we come together and do Random Acts of Kindness in our community. And it's been a really great thing. And recently there was an awesome Random Act of Kindness done by a local Duvalian, Austin Jenks. He is a singer, and he was on a very popular show recently, and he decided that he kind of wanted to give back to our little community, and so he planned a surprise concert here locally at the Riverview School District building. And when I walked in that room, it was packed with people, and the feeling was just incredible. And when Austin came out, he was just so genuinely humbled by everyone that had showed up to support him.
How you guys doing tonight? Well, I always say this, and I can't not say it, so. My name is Austin Jenks, and I come from Duval, Washington, and this is Rattlesnake Lake, yes, fishing in a old damn state. When I place, and really the Snoqualmie Valley is a very, very, very special place. And yeah, it is. I feel very blessed to be from here, and obviously, I mean, you guys are amazing, so thanks for coming out tonight.
And then at the end, he stayed around, he signed autographs for people, and he just was so genuinely touched that everybody came out. And there was over 900 people that came out to that concert. And it's a night I'll never forget.
There's just something about a small town community like Duval where when people are in need, they're there. They respond, whether they're firefighters or what. And that's probably one of the greatest things for me since I moved out into this area was that the sense of family.
It's really true. I mean, I've really grown to enjoy the community, and I have so many good friends, and there's not much more you could ask for.
I've never been a part of a community like this where I've known so many people, and so many helpful people and generous people that it's really mind-boggling.
About a year and a half after I moved here, the house I lived in, burned down to the ground. 20 minutes after the fire trucks left, there were people I didn't even know that came down with food, and clothing, and offered places to stay. You know, it was the community just had an outpouring.
But you know, the whole world has grown out of small towns, really, when you think about it.
As I'm driving through, I see people walking on the street that I know, and hey, I know them from the gym, I know them from Cece's Coffee, and it's just nice to come to your own little special place where you feel that it's a close community and you don't get lost in the crowd here.
And it's really what makes Duval such a unique place is the spirit of how that has transformed itself over time, but we have not lost who we are as a community.
The spirit of the place is just what really has kept me here.
I have never wanted to live anyplace else. I've done a lot of traveling. I've never seen a place that I like better. I think Duval is the best.
And it's a good life. There's good community.
It seems like an odd group of people somehow all ended up together in a small community. There were people who came out here because they wanted to be in the woods and they wanted to live the rough, rugged, rural lifestyle. There were people who were out here because they wanted to farm or they wanted to have milk cows. And there were people here because they wanted to buy an inexpensive home and real estate property, pretty property. There were people who came out because they wanted to get out of the city. These were all different people, but they came together in this small space and somehow became a pretty amazing community of people that grew close together and really made Duval an amazingly unique place.
someday.
Happy 100 Duval!
Happy 100 Duval!
Happy 100 Duval!
Happy 100 Duval!
Happy 100th birthday, Duval. Good going.
Happy 100 Duval! Peace!
Happy 100 Duval!
Happy 100 Duval.
There you go, Larry. That was much better.
Thank you. Thank you, Gary.
Happy 100 Duval! Woo! Happy 100 Duval!
Plus, what is x squared plus 4x plus 4?
Happy 100 Duval!
Happy 100 Duval!
Happy 100 Duval!
Yeah, it was a beautiful day. Keep looking at the camera, Larry. Don't look away.
Yeah, Larry, look at the camera.
Thank you. And wow, look at that camera.
Hey, here's the plan. Said GoPro will mount here. As you see, is the all-important duct tape. There's no flyback. All the way up. In theory, the GoPro comes down with the piano and lives to tell the tale. That's the hope. That's the dream.
It took them a long time, but anyway, you know, I shouldn't tell people that.
That's okay. We won't use it. All right, you ready? I am ready. Okay.
Keep going. I like this.
Appreciate your time.
Well, I'm glad to
Great
do it.
stories. And if you know what, there's something else.
I'd go another hour.
I'm stuck.
Oh, it's great to be here.
Oh, this is wonderful,
It's
yeah.
great to not be in jail, too.
Garlic toast. Yes, that sounds lovely.
The camera lives, and it's still ticking.
Feliz 100 años Duval!
And that's pretty much the story. Yep, pretty good stuff, huh?